Hello, so today we're going to be doing a short guide about augments and basically how to pick augments. This isn't going to be like a all-intensive guide on this is the best augment for this comp and this is the best comp for another comp. If you want to see stuff like that, this is the channel where I do daily VOD reviews. There's going to be occasional little fun condensed guides like this. As you can see, I did an Orn Artifact guide a bit ago. I also post clips and stuff like that, but it's primarily a VOD review channel. So if there's a comp that you want to learn how to play, like Shapeshifter's Fast 9, you want to see like what I pick and what augments and my reasoning behind it, I go through it in excruciating detail and I yap the whole way through. So if you really want to learn those type of things, that's what for the channel is. For this guide, basically what I'm going to give you is just like the basic guideline or way that you should think about augments a lot in your games. I'm going to show you one or two examples from those said videos that are posted on my channel. So anyways, right here is going to be tactics.tools. Now, a lot of people always ask me whenever I show this in videos. I do have a guide where I talk about stats in general and why I use them and how I use them. I'm just using this to kind of augment my explanation in a way. I wouldn't really worry too much about using this website in order to like figure out what the quote-unquote best augment is to pick all the time. You really have to work on it and decide on your augments with two basic strategies, right? Whenever you're picking an augment, you should really only ask yourself two questions. The first question you should always ask yourself is, number one, does this make me strong now? Right? Or strong, does this make me strongest now? And then the second question that you should ask is, can I greed for this to make me stronger later? So basically, you basically have to ask yourself just these two questions, and you'll get pretty far in TFT in terms of picking augments. The main thing is you ask yourself when you're looking at augment, does this make me strongest now? If you're playing tempo, right, that's like you're trying to maximize your placements and maximize your HP. That's like the one strategy in TFT. There's basically like, you know, you can boil it down to if you're going to play like super aggressively, if you're going to play it super passively, and you can like mix in between those two strategies. And the other thing is, can I greed for this to make me stronger later? Just want to ask yourself, hey, this augment might be really good later on, but do I have the ability with my board right now to sacrifice being strong in this current turn in order to become stronger later? If you ask yourself these two questions with the augments, it will help you a lot. And that's basically the main framework you should always have when you're looking at certain augments. So right now, I'll just kind of go over like in general, like this set has been very like 2-1 heavy. It's been very like pick augments early. They give you a lot of direction, a lot of power. There's different types of augments that exist in the game of TFT. Like right now, you know, you can boil it down to like, if I just tell you like types of augments. Right, number one is always going to be like combat, then number two is usually going to be like econ, and then three is going to be like reroll focused, right? And econ and reroll focused are kind of interchangeable. So when you think about augments, it usually falls into one of these three categories. If you're going to take a combat augment, an econ augment, or reroll, or be more reroll focused with your augment. Whenever you think about augments like this, you should always consider combat to be the one that you want to take the most. When you get to the late game situation, like when you get to your final board, you will always be stronger with combat augments, right? The only thing that separates two final boards, if you could just close your eyes and poof, you instantly hit all of the units that you want to hit, the perfect board that you're going for, all the units, everything the strongest, like you have every upgraded unit as strong as possible. The only thing that separates you from other boards is the combat augments that you get. So what are combat augments? An example would be anything that really gives you some sort of in-game effects, right? Something like shields up, for example. This would count as a combat augment. Your vanguards have 30% stronger shield, and they're immune to crowd control. It is something that activates within the fight. It's something that is combat related, right? Something like higher education as well. Your scholars gain 12% attack speed. That is giving you some in-game combat buff. Something you'll notice with most combat augments, however, is that they're a lot stronger later in the game. Having a combat augment early isn't that strong. This comes back to the question, does this make me stronger now, or does this make me stronger later? Augments really vary in terms of how strong they are based on like when you take them. Shields up is really difficult to take early on because it doesn't do that much until you have like 6 Vanguard and those later game units and Mordecai's and upgraded units like that. It's not really that essential in stage 2-1 if you have a Blitzcrank 1 to take shields up and to play around it. It matters more like at 3-2 when you already have a board of upgraded Vanguards and you get it, it sets you up really well for your late game, for example. The same with stuff like higher education, same with a lot of different combat related augments. So a lot of times when you're starting the game off, you often want to go towards econ augment. So what would be an econ augment? For example, one that used to be really good was Pilfer. It has fallen off dramatically, but there's other econ augments like balanced budget, for example. A lot of times they're going to average a lot lower. The idea is that, like, you know, when I was saying like the distinction between combat and non-combat, a lot of times you want to angle yourself more towards taking combat augments to make yourself stronger for like your end game scenario. Econ can help you set up to hit your board. That's the main reason. Like econ early, if you have dollars early, I made a little econ guide a little bit ago. When you hit those early econ thresholds, it makes you very, very strong. You'll see that there's some things like misconnections, for example, precise planning averages very, very well. This is one of the very strong econ augments because basically it cashes out so much, right? Especially if you take it stage 2, you basically, if you're winning or losing by 4 or fewer units, which is gonna happen for the entirety of stage 2, you're getting an extra 2 gold per round. You're gonna make early econ intervals, and it will set you up for later. So this is an example of something that's gonna make you stronger later in the game. So it's very worthwhile to take it. Anyways, the main thing that you should always consider is whether the augment actually fits your board. That's why I don't suggest like always looking at sites like these. Like I look at them because I'm trying to optimize and like make sense of it, because I'm in like masters elo and I feel like I need to do that. But if you're not like at that stage in TFT and you're still like working around like the mechanics and understanding the units and placements of the units and all sorts of other optimizations, then the stats really won't help you. You always have to think about like thematically what you're doing. So for example, in this game, this is a game where I played shapeshifters with fast 9. I'm just going to use it as an example to explain my augment choices, and then you can see the idea of being strong now versus being strong later, kind of like how I'm trying to explain in this video. So first of all, this is 2-1, right? If you look in the stats, I will show you that Eternal Growth is very, very strong. You'll see that Eternal Growth Plus is a lot better than Eternal Growth, but Eternal Growth still averages above a 4.5. So in general, like the way you can look at it is that it's like if you have a spot for it, it's like a 50-50 if you top 4, and then if you like play your spot really well and you have a good spot for it, you'll top 4, and if you're just taking it without a good spot for it, then you'll probably bot 4. But the reason I took Eternal Growth in this particular game is because if you read it, it gives you a Jace, right? Shapeshifters gain 30 HP, so what you want is you want an early amount of shapeshifters that are very, very strong. I have a really good spot for Eternal Growth because I have a Jace, and also on my bench you will see that I have a Shyvana. So Shyvana is really essential to this shapeshifter line. It's a very specific example for this set, this era of patches, right? But basically, if you look at it, Shyvana is going to be your main damage dealer for much of the game. So I start the game off with a Shyvana. It also upgrades my Jace. So this is a really good example of something that's going to make me strong later, because it's going to put me in a really good spot for my units to basically do a lot of work towards the late game. And I feel like I can greed towards this because I have a Shyvana early. Shyvana is so essential to this comp. And I talk about a lot in the video, that having her early and scaling up her HP is going to be really, really beneficial for the rest of the game. And as you can see, with this board, because you usually want to play around Briar and Smolder towards the end of the game, you really want to be able to make it to like a level 9 situation. You want to be able to make it to those high levels to hit those high cost units. You'll see that I push really aggressively with this game because I'm win streaking for much of the game. So I want to make items early. I want to itemize my strong units. I want to try and continue this theme that I have going here, which is that I am trying to push my levels to the absolute limit and continue winning as many rounds as possible, such that I can make it to a board where I have a lot of gold to roll at those high levels, like level 8, level 9, as opposed to re-rolling in particular. You'll see here as well, I get there's a gold orb drop, so I get a completed item. Thieves Gloves is something that's really strong early game, as well as really strong late game. It kind of like falls off a little bit in the middle game, but basically Thieves Gloves just gives you like a random set of items. But for efficiency purposes, it's very strong early because, it spikes your board a lot harder. Then towards like the middle and late game, you can get griefed by the Thieves' Glove, so it's a little bit more difficult to deal with. But at least for early game, this goes with the theme of, okay, I already took an augment that's I'm trying to cash out for later. So in order to compensate for my augment cashing out later, I have to make sure that my board is strong now, right? That's what I mean. If my board was weak and I have an augment that's going to be useful later, then when am I strong, right? I'm just hoping, I'm crossing my fingers that things work out in the future. So I want to make sure that I continue to stay strong because I have this augment that will be worthwhile later in the game. So I take Thieves' Gloves. It also gives HP, so it's actually pretty good on Shapeshifters, and I have upgraded units, so I can easily play around this. And then you'll see the augment choice, right? So in this augment choice, I'll show you one or two examples, right? So here's Unleash the Beast, and there's also Sleight of Hand, and there's also Explosive Growth, right? This is actually a difficult decision to make, because if you think about it, the board that I'm trying to play, I'll show it right here in the team builder. The board that I'm trying to play is the Shapeshifter Fast 9 board, which looks something along the lines of this. And I need a Nomzy. Right? You're trying to go level 9 as fast as possible, and you're trying to play Shapeshifters with a Smolder and a Briar. If you look at the comp in particular, like let's say we search in the stats, I'll just show you for a second. Tool or Explorer. And let's just go, let's say I imagine that I hit my final board, which is going to be Briar 2 and Smolder 2. If you look at augments, I think Unleash the Beast is going to average really, really strong, right? This averages a 2.0. This is going to average really, really strong, right? Something like Explosive Growth. It averages a little bit less, but it's an econ augment that basically lets you level up really fast. So it's going to make it easier for me to hit this Briar and this other dude, right? If you look at Sleight of Hand, it also averages really high in this particular situation, but that's because of how strong it is in the mid game, right? It's not necessarily going to be their strongest pick for late game. As you can see, it has a very small sample size, so I wouldn't suggest like it's particularly broken or strong on the units. But the idea is that you don't think about itemizing the Briar with Unleash the Beast. You don't think about Explosive Growth to make it to level 9. Sleight of Hand, for me here, is very, very strong because I already have a Thieves' Gloves. I have a Thieves' Gloves with Eternal Growth. It gives all my Thieves' Gloves 20% attack speed, and they all gain 100 health. Which is crazy. So the stats don't even matter. I don't care what the sample sizes are, right? I didn't look at the stats here when I was playing the game. Combat bandages might be good. Explosive Growth, like I said, it would make my board way more consistent. If I had Explosive Growth, I can be like level 7 next turn, and I could already be like formulating my board and making it to level 9. It makes sense with what like the concept is for the end goal, but that's not something that makes me strong right now. I want to make sure my board is strong so that I can get my Eternal Growth value so that I can be really strong for later. Sleight of Hand immediately screams that I'm strong right now. So it's obvious pick Sleight of Hand here. And what ends up happening is I pretty much streak for most of the stage. I think I lose like 1 or 2 fights. It just so happens this game turns out to be high roll. I hit Lucky Gloves at the end and I had a bunch of Thieves' Gloves. So it was all cool. So that's like the main idea that I wanted to try and explain in like one video, is that you should always just like take a second whenever you're trying to pick an augment, and you should always think to yourself, okay, based on this board, is it actually takeable because it's going to be really good for me? Or is it something that I can work around later in the game? A lot of times you'll spend too much time taking augments that will make you better off later, or you'll take too many augments that are like either econ or rolling focused, and then you don't have good combat for later. You have to balance between like, if you take augments that will cash out later, then you have to make sure your board is really strong. If your board is really strong, then you have to balance it with things that will cash out later in order to like compensate, right? If you take an augment that makes you really strong now, then you have to play around your board to like greed it so that you can try and get the most value so that you actually hit something a lot later in the game. And that's the main thing that you always want to balance when you're taking augments. Typically, when you're taking augments, a lot of times you'll try and hit one of each of these. A lot of times it will be like, if you're thinking about types of augments, if you're saying like 3 augments, right? you should always go for like an econ augment a lot of times early on, because it just helps you to set up for late game, or something that scales you into late game, like learning to spell or something like that, so you know that you have good combat for later. Then it should just be after that, it should always be like combat, right? It depends on the situation. Of course, it's what you get offered, but a lot of times what you should always consider when you're taking augments is to try and stack as many combat augments as possible. Econ augments are fine, but you never want to be in a spot where you're taking multiple econ augments. It's very rare that you can take that gold and convert it into making like some kind of giga board later. You always want to try and balance it between taking something that, if you take something that doesn't necessarily make you strong the turn that you take it, you have to make sure your board can support that. And if your board cannot support that, you shouldn't take it. And then either way, and then on top of that, you should always make sure that you have at least a couple combat augments, especially if it's like a prismatic lobby. You don't want to fall behind. If you take like an econ prismatic and somebody takes a combat prismatic, they're going to be significantly stronger than you. It doesn't matter what their board is and what your board is. They will probably beat your ass because they have a much higher cap in terms of how much power they have in their board, because once you use your gold, you're screwed. The other thing that you should always consider is just the spot of the comp as well. There's a lot of these very niche ones. I want to point them out. For example, like School Mascot, Eternal Growth, High Horsepower. These things where it's like, you know, either a hero augment like High Horsepower where you play around Lilia, or School Mascot. You shouldn't just take them because they look like they're strong. I know this seems very like dumb to say, but it is something that comes up quite a bit. You shouldn't really like hard force towards School Mascot if you don't already start with a couple of Eldritch units. If you look at School Mascot, average is really high, but you see the average of 2-1 is a little bit lower because typically you're forcing towards it, and the average of you taking it later is a lot better, because a lot of times you get it offered at 3-2 because there's this thing called augment tailoring, right? If you play a bunch of Eldritch units on your board, then you're more likely to see an Eldritch related augment when you pop open your augments on 3-2 and 4-2. So a lot of times, like, people that are taking School Mascot that do better with the augment, it's because they're already playing Eldritch. They already have a good Eldritch spot. Like, they have a couple Syndras, they have a couple Nylas, they have a Mordekaiser, and then they hit School Mascot. So like, oh yeah, easy clap. I just put in the Mordekaiser and I do that. So you should always consider those things as well. Now, the only reason I say you should look, the main reason, or the main point where if you want to look at stats, you should look at stats, is when you have the option of 2 viable choices for a particular board. For example, like if you see Fairy Crest and you see something like Royal Guard, you know, those are 2 augments that, you know, if you're playing Fairy, which should you take, Royal Guard or Fairy Crest? You'll see that Fairy Crest performs a lot better because Royal Guard doesn't really do all that much in a lot of cases, right? It seems like it's really good, like, oh, I'm playing Fairy, I take Royal Guard, easy clap. It's kind of like you're better off just not playing as many Fairy units because, or you're better off taking Fairy Crown so you can like fit in a better set of units a lot of times, for example. But I'm just trying to give like a case, right? There's times where it's like 2 combat augments, like let's say Combat Caster and Combat Bandages. Maybe in some comp you might read this and it's a combat augment. It says, okay, I recover HP. That might be good if I need like a really strong tank, or I have like preservers or something, or I have warriors, like units that like take a lot of aggro and my front line has to live really long, right? Combat Caster is also really strong because it gives you a shield for 3 seconds. This is where TFT balance kind of comes into play sometimes. Then you should look up the augments to see which one are better for your particular comp. Because if you're picking between 2 augments, that's where the stats kind of matter a little bit. It's not to say that one is obviously right or one is obviously wrong. It's more so to say, like, on average, it seems like this one performs better. So if I don't know which one to pick between 2 combats, for example, or 2 econs, for example, I might be better off just double checking to see, hey, if this one performs better on average for the units that I'm playing, there might be something that I don't understand about the mechanics that make it really strong. For example, Combat Caster is broken with Callista. It's the best augment on Callista because Callista, the way that she casts, like, she fucking grants infinite shielding, and if the Callista has infinite shield, she doesn't die, so then she keeps everybody alive because the way the fairy armor and the Rakan works, right? So it became like, if you see Combat Caster and you're playing Callista, you're in like a game-winning spot. The same thing with something like Little Buddies, right? Little Buddies is extremely strong with Callista and extremely strong with Rise, because you're playing so many 1 and 2 cost units on those boards because they're relatively inexpensive board. If you're playing vertical portal with a portal emblem or vertical fairy Callista Rakan, you might notice that little buddies compared to other augments, you might look at it and say, well, you know, I'll math it out, the attack speed, you know, maybe I get this much from here, I get this much from there. That's when it matters more to like look and see. If you want to know a lot of these things though, I like look at the stats myself and I talk about them. There are the VODs that go into more depth. But anyways, that's a little quick augment guide. So the main thing to remember, like I said, just think to yourself, does this make me strong now? And then can I greed to be strong later? Right? That's like the main idea. And you should always ask yourself these things, right? Don't just go clicking golden egg because it looks like it's fun. Ask yourself reasonably and evaluate the rest of your board and the rest of other people's boards and see like, hey, will I die before this augment has any use? Then if no, and if you think like, hey, I'm strong enough to be able to play around this, then you can go for the second option. But typically if you just play the strongest option, it's usually the safe strategy that you can just farm yourself some top 4s and rank up a little bit. Thank you for watching. There should be a patch note review coming up soon, and then we're gonna be off to like set 13 very soon, so that's gonna be very exciting. Thank you for watching and hope you have a great rest of day. See ya later.